Hey everybody, it's your boy here, Matt. Just Matt tonight, not Metal Matt. If you want to call me Metal Matt, that's totally fine. I'm cool with that. It's been a minute since I've done a video, and I realize I need to rectify that because I want you guys to be glad you subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe and the bell. Thank you. Actually, no, that's a demand. Hit the subscribe and the bell. I wanted to talk about a very important subject that is cropping up in my own life recently strongly. I've dealt with it before during my last few years of my life. There's a phrase in recovery you'll hear. They call it the disease model of addiction. What it means is what it says. It's the idea that addiction is a disease and it needs to be treated as one. There's a pathology, there are markers, there are, forgive me, I'm trying to think of the terms, catalysts and, symptoms, the big one, symptoms. Symptoms and outcomes, treatment and outcomes kind of thing. So I'll explain kind of my take on that and then how that affects my life at the moment. Because it does badly, like very negatively. So I'm not sure where this idea came from, but the idea, from what I can understand, the basis of it is, a person with an addiction will seek out their substance of choice, even if the outcome is negative, right? So if they know they will come to harm or they'll harm others, they know that, and yet they will still seek out the substance or the behavior. Let's be clear here. Let's talk about everything, right? Like we do in Smart Recovery. It's all harmful habits. So everything from alcohol addiction to opioids to driving unsafely to having sex with complete strangers. All of it falls under this heading according to the idea, the theory. And I've had problems with this since before I got into treatment, 4 years ago it's been, because a bunch of reasons. One of them is barring things like withdrawal from alcohol, and which can be fatal, and you may need medical help with that. I know from experience this is the case. And there's other things where withdrawing can be extremely unpleasant, to put it very mildly. Very unpleasant. A lot of practitioners, let's call them, counselors, will talk about the disease model of addiction, and they'll compare it to diabetes in particular. And I have a way to completely smash that. And before I go there, let me just say I'm a huge fan, as I've talked about before, of Stephen Slate, Stanton Peele, Gabor Mate, Dr. Carl Hart, other people who, to some extent, what's the actress's name? Victoria Christian, I think that's her name. People who espouse the non-addiction, non-disease model of addiction. So I'd been hearing this for a long time before I even got help in 2016. It's a disease. Here's the thing. The reason that's useful to people like me and others in recovery is that thinking of addiction as a disease has led to sweeping changes in actual laws across the country, at least in the United States. And so now if you are convicted of a drug charge, where it used to be they'd throw away the key and your life was pretty much done, nowadays you'll get an option of treatment and sometimes house arrest. And I know this from my own experience because I know about 4 guys right now, and a girl actually, so 5 people, who are on this, under house arrest because of newer programs, right? That recognize disease as an addiction. So It's like you've got cancer, let's say, and you go and get chemo, and while you're getting chemo, both it's expensive, but also you're weakened. You're in a weakened state, so you can't be expected to work. Similar thing with legislation and addiction. You can't be expected to partake in what we think of as everyday activities because you have a disease and you're being treated for it. Like in my case, when I was in rehab earlier this year, I was being treated for a disease, is what the law would describe it as, I guess you could say. But here's where that becomes a problem. When you believe that you have a disease, you may, it's very possible, not always, but you may label yourself that diagnosis. So you may go around telling people that you are an addict for a long time, years, decades, possibly the rest of your life. I know this from my own life. I have friends who call themselves lifelong addicts and say they have the disease of addiction. They'll say it right now to you on my camera. They'll say it. If they allowed themselves to be filmed, I mean, that's the point, but they have the disease of addiction, they will say. And in some ways I get it, because we're all seeking a grand narrative, a story, a larger story that encompasses our experiences. We want to believe that our lives have a flow from A to B to C all the way to Z and beyond, right? And if we don't feel that that's possible or plausible, we may, at least we fear we may, engage in even more destructive activities and habits. So in that sense, I get it as a way to argue with addiction. In that sense, I get it. I get it. Here's the problem. Millions of people around the world, literally millions, believe that they are inflicted with an illness that can never be cured, can barely be treated, must always be held at bay, typically by 12-step doctrine, AA, NA, SA, GA, OA, and so on. 60 plus anonymous 12-step doctrines, as far as I know, right now in 2020. And I'm not slamming 12-step. Let's be clear here. I'm not. I've spoken positively about it before, but also critically in other videos. But there are people in the world who think that that's the only way, is to see this as a disease. I am sick. I'm a sick person, and I need the cure of my higher power, etc. Again, why is this problematic? Because you divorce yourself of the possibility of making choices. You are cutting off the chance that you can choose to stop using, or not call him or her or them, not go to that trap house or that pharmacy, wherever. Excuse me. Nose is itchy. You can let yourself off the hook for that stuff because you have this disease. In other words, it's not your fault. It's the fault of the disease, which I feel is horse shit. Whenever I have used, it's been with the full knowledge that I was using, that I was about to walk down a path, open a door, make a phone call, metaphor, reality mixed together, okay? And right now, in my own family, a thing I usually don't talk about on camera, but I will here, because I need to, because I'm feeling very, very shook right now, very upset. My own father will say that I, his son, have a disease the disease of addiction. His own father was an alcoholic. There's no room for debate here. He was an alcoholic. Worse than me by all accounts. But he stopped drinking on his own, supposedly. You see where I'm going with this? My father used the word partier. He said his father was a partier, but I, his son, had the disease of addiction. Now, any of you watching this who have any experience in recovery know that the word partier is a fucking nuclear bomb. You don't throw it around mildly. You don't play with it. It's not a toy. It's a very quick way to undermine and upset a person trying to stay sober. And it did its job. Thank you, Dad. You fucked me up royally with that shit. It's okay for him to have a beer whenever, because of pandemics and quarantine. It's okay for my mom too if she wishes. And see, on my end, I think all that's fine too. Just be honest that alcohol is an addictive substance, and maybe you could possibly slip into that state, and your father definitely was in that state for many years, and no matter how he got out of it or stopped it or held it at bay, doesn't matter, because he was an abusive drunk for many years. I've heard many horror stories. I'm sure it's just barely scratching the surface. But for you to talk about him as this redeemable man with flaws, and to talk about me as though I'm a cursed man, I'm cursed. I must keep this at bay no matter what, like I'm a fucking werewolf. That's abusive. That's abuse. And you and I have had countless conversations recently where you dislike the word abuse, which is ironically how I reify and reintegrate the word. You yell at someone who says you might be abusive. It's exactly like the old gag of, stop fucking yelling. It's the same gag. Same gag. I don't believe addiction is a disease. I think there's some overlap. I think in terms of legislation, if it helps addicts to get help over being locked up right away, then I'm in favor of it being called a disease for the time being. In other words, it's a placeholder, okay? It's a thing that helps for right now. But once we get past the hurdle of whatever comes next in terms of legislation and treatment, we ditch that word, disease. We ditch it. Because it is not a disease. It is not. Back to something I said earlier, let me finish up on this note. I've heard from many counselors the idea that addiction is a disease akin to diabetes. And I confronted a counselor a couple of years ago and I said, because I was pretty much livid at that point, because I was tired of hearing that shit from grown fucking adults who supposedly went to school. School doesn't mean shit, by the way, for a lot of professions. It's just a way to impress your boss, jerk off his dick, and get on the Forbes 500 because his company has more master's degrees than other fucking companies. I know that from experience from a company I worked for last year, who I won't name here. They knew who the fuck they are. You can't sue me because I didn't name you, sir. The idea that we are lesser than or fundamentally different than other people is wrong. It's wrong. And it's abuse. And I reject it. And I would say, if I have a point to this video, be careful who you talk to about having the disease of addiction before you go and do a bong rip in front of them, or down 3 shots, or call the Connect for a bag, or call up a hooker for a hit. Any of that shit. we have the same disease, if it's a disease. Asshole